Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive historical mystery. We're talking about a theology that literally dominated the early Christian church, but somehow completely fell off the map. It's the idea of the ultimate restoration of all creation. Back in 1878, a scholar named Edward Beecher made this astonishing discovery. He found that the early church overwhelmingly believed in a complete, ultimate restoration of everyone. Not endless punishment, but endless restoration. It's a pretty wild historical reality, and it absolutely challenges so many of our modern assumptions about the afterlife. So here's our roadmap for today's historical detective story. We're going to look at 1. A forgotten church history, 2. Fathers of universal restoration, 3. Lost in translation, 4. The purpose of punishment, and finally 5. The triumph of relentless love. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. A forgotten church history.
Okay, to really wrap our heads around this, we have to rewind to the first 500 years of the church. This is the pivotal era, right? Believers are closest to the apostles, and they're reading the New Testament in its native Greek. These are the exact minds that assembled the biblical texts and transformed the Roman Empire. And honestly, the data here is shocking. Out of the 6 major ancient centers of Christianity, 4 of them, Alexandria, Caesarea, Antioch, and Eastern Syria, believed that God would ultimately restore all of his creation. 4 out of 6. Only 1 center believed in the annihilation of the wicked, and just 1 single center, North Africa, believed in endless punishment. That North African tradition was heavily influenced by Augustine, and it actually became the root of the Western Church, which, as you might guess, is exactly where our modern, widely accepted concept of endless punishment comes from today.
Moving on to Section 2. Fathers of universal restoration.
So, you might be wondering, who exactly were the architects of this early view? Well, let's start with Clement of Alexandria. He was born way back around 150 AD. His logical framework is just brilliantly simple. Basically, he argued that God is absolutely good and absolutely powerful, right? Therefore, to say God is unable to save all of humanity is, well, it's unthinkable, because that would mean God is fundamentally weak. On the flip side, to say God is unwilling to save everyone is equally unthinkable, because that would mean God isn't fundamentally good. So Clement hits the nail on the head here. A God who is both entirely powerful and perfectly good must, by definition, desire and actually accomplish the salvation of the entire universe.
And this foundational logic just spread like wildfire from there. Take Origen, for example. He was writing around 250 AD, and he asserted that God doesn't just, lock away his enemies in some cosmic graveyard. Instead, God overcomes evil by completely transforming the evildoers themselves, meaning their hostility literally ceases to exist. And then we have Gregory of Nyssa around 395 AD. This guy was so highly respected he was actually called the Father of the Fathers. He believed that eventually evil will pass entirely into non-existence, period. He was convinced that not a single being created by God would fail to achieve the kingdom of God.
Which brings us to a super powerful illustration of what it actually means to truly transform an enemy. Think about the Apostle Paul. Before he was Paul, he was Saul, right? And Saul was actively imprisoning and killing early Christians. He was an absolute, sworn enemy of the church. But God didn't just permanently banish him or wipe him off the map. No, God transformed Saul the persecutor into Paul the apostle. He essentially destroyed his enemy by making him a friend. It's a total game changer of a concept.
That brings us to Section 3, Lost in Translation.
Okay, so if this concept of universal restoration was the dominant view, what on earth happened? How did we lose it? Well, the answer really lies in linguistic clues. Over the centuries, translations actually began to shift in meaning, heavily influenced by figures in the Western Church like Augustine. Basically, 4 totally distinct ancient words eventually just got lumped together into the single English blanket word, hell. We've got Sheol in Hebrew and Hades in Greek, which honestly just meant the grave or the place of the dead. Then there's Gehenna, and finally Tartarus, which referred to a place of confinement, kind of like a temporary holding cell. But here's the kicker. In their original languages, literally none of these 4 words inherently meant endless punishment beyond the grave.
Let's zoom in on Gehenna for a second, because that's the word most commonly translated as hell in our modern versions. Historically speaking, Gehenna was an actual physical location on a map. It was a burning dump just outside Jerusalem where the corpses of criminals were flung. It was associated with gross idolatry and immense dishonor. To the ancient Jewish mind, hearing the word Gehenna evoked the same kind of physical horrors and deep corruption as a modern person today hearing the word Auschwitz. It implied a place of ultimate historical horror and shame. It was absolutely not referring to some permanent spiritual dimension of endless torture.
And this brings up a really critical question, one that totally challenges our most basic modern assumptions. When ancient texts used words that we translate today as forever or eternal, what did they actually mean? Really think about it. How long is forever?
Well, this all hinges on the Greek word aion. And here's the thing. Aion doesn't actually mean never-ending. It literally translates to an age. It's a period of time where the boundaries are simply unseen or unknown. Think of it kind of like standing on the deck of a cruise ship, looking out at the ocean. The water appears to go on forever, right? But that's just because you can't see the end on the horizon. Just because the end is unknown or unseen to you doesn't mean an end doesn't exist.
Now, Section 4, the purpose of punishment.
So if punishment isn't endless, why would a loving God allow it to happen at all? Early theologians like Theodore of Mopsuestia viewed punishment fundamentally as restorative, not vindictive. It follows this really logical path. First, sin naturally leads to misery. Then, that misery eventually causes a person to wake up, recognize their state, and fear God. That recognition is what brings the person to turn to God for grace. And crucially, this is the most important part. Once that restoration is achieved, the punishment ends. It's a lot like an alcoholic who finally hits rock bottom, realizes their choices are destroying their life, and decides to turn the whole thing around.
Therefore, according to this early theology, the purpose of divine punishment in the afterlife operates exactly the same way it does in this life. It is a temporary, corrective measure designed to cure. It's meant to bring a person to the deep understanding of their profound need for saving grace. It's definitely not there to just lock them away in a perpetual state of conscious suffering.
And that brings us to Section 5, the triumph of relentless love. This really brings our historical detective story to its ultimate resolution, the character of the divine and a relentless, unconditional pursuit of humanity. To really illustrate this relentless pursuit, just think about 3 famous parables taught by Jesus. First, a good shepherd isn't just satisfied with a 99% success rate, right? No, he leaves the 99 to search until he finds that one lost sheep. Or a woman isn't satisfied keeping 90% of her wealth, she turns the house upside down searching until she finds the one lost coin. And the father of the prodigal son, he doesn't just write off his wayward child, he waits eagerly and joyfully for him to come home. The huge takeaway here is that the divine seeks until he finds and is never ever satisfied with anything less than a 100% restoration of his creation.
The core thesis here is beautifully simple. God's love is unconditional, His power is irresistible, and God never gives up. But wait, what about human free will? Well, while humans definitely have free will, it always operates within the ultimate boundaries of divine sovereignty and care. Think of it like this. It's like letting your kids play freely in a huge field behind your house, but explicitly forbidding them from running out into a busy street. A good parent puts a limit on their freedom out of love, right? To prevent them from destroying themselves. In this view, God allows freedom, absolutely, but He will not allow humanity to permanently destroy themselves forever.
To really bring this all home, let's ask a deeply personal closing question. Think about it. How much are you worth? Imagine a father trying to explain his love to his little kid. That father might answer by using impossibly large, totally made-up numbers, right? Saying something like he loves them 537 billion times and more. To a child, that just means a love greater than the furthest distance they could possibly imagine.
If a flawed human father can love his children that boundlessly and that relentlessly, the early church believed the divine's love was infinitely more limitless. In this ancient view, every single person created is entirely priceless. Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought to consider today. If the early Christian church fundamentally believed in a relentless love that restores absolutely everyone, how might rediscovering this lost history completely reshape how we view each other and the world right now?